Events Committee. So on behalf of myself, our committee of about 14 people, and the broader Public Policy Council, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to spend the evening with you. Wow, I'm just watching the number of participants go up on the screen. So exciting. I see like 165 people. So yeah, this quickly becoming a tradition. I am so excited to just spend the evening talking about voting. Voting is so in vogue right now. You cannot like go 5 minutes without seeing it on your social media, somebody texting you, probably like a robot texting you, reminding you to vote, or whatever, being bombarded with it on email. So we know, though, that there's a lot on the ballot this year besides just voting for president and your U.S. senator. There are 11 statewide Colorado ballot measures, plus a number of local ballot measures. So it takes a lot of time and energy to educate yourself on everything on the ballot. So we've put together this time just to, get yourself educated, learn some more facts as you educate yourself on voting in November. And we hope this is just like a comfortable forum where it's kind of like we all have those friends where they're either more educated and politically savvy on the ballot measures than you, or just somebody whose opinion you really trust, and you're always like scrambling and asking them at the last minute, like, hey, what do you think about this? So hopefully this kind of like stimulates that idea of like sitting down with a glass of wine for a close friend and just getting more educated. So with that, let me just move the slide. I promise I know how PowerPoint works. Just want to run through some quick housekeeping measures. We are going to be recording this presentation, so if that offends you, just want to give you a heads up on that. Please mute yourself unless you are speaking. We will, and I'll show this on the next slide, we will have dedicated blocks of time for the Q&A. So please drop those in the chat specifically to the hosts. They're going to be acting like little Q&A fairies for me and shuffling up the questions that we're going to actually ask out to our speakers. So please do chat there. And I did want to mention, if you didn't notice, in our registration, Blanchard Family Wines is sponsoring us or partnering with us this evening, and they are offering 20% discount. That link is live through the evening. I've got my wine here from Blanchard, so 10 out of 10. I'm going to open this after finishing these opening comments. Last thing is, if you are a Junior League of Denver member and you are looking for credit for this event, please make sure that your name on Zoom matches your league name so that we can do a little match. Last thing, I just want to quickly read this statement. Junior League of Denver is a nonpartisan organization, and this event features a review of ballot measures with impartial analysis to help attendees understand the purpose and effect of measures before casting their votes. Please be respectful with your questions and comments and in a manner that is reflective of the league's approach of nonpartisanship. So you guys just be cool. I know everyone gets fired up, everyone gets excited, but please just be respectful of, the committee that put this forward and our speakers. They're just providing facts and information for you to help be an informed voter and, take with it what you will. So please, no political diatribes, neither on the chat nor on the audio. However, please do ask questions, drop them in, and we are excited to be engaged this evening. So with that, let's talk about the program. So first, we're going to do a presentation with Count Me in Colorado and Caitlin Schneider. I will introduce her in just a moment. She's going to cover 9 of the 11 statewide ballot measures. And then we'll go into a focused ballot measure discussion specifically on Amendment B and 118. So and I will introduce all those speakers that I'm so excited about throughout a number of think tanks and research and just lots of general good information coming in for this evening's presentation. So with that, I think we can go ahead and get started with Count Me In. I don't think I have anything else. Can I get a thumbs up from, I can see Kristen and Alex. Anything I'm missing before we get started? Okay, cool. Thumbs up. Okay, we're good to go. First up, Caitlin Schneider. She is with Colorado Fiscal Institute as her day job, but she also is one of the leaders of Count Me in Colorado project, which I think has been in inception since 2016. She's been in Colorado for a long time, ever since she graduated from university, moved to Boulder and fell in love with it, but is originally from the Midwest. We're so excited to have her, and I'll let her introduce Count Me In Colorado. Caitlin?
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. And thanks, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. Count Me In is a collaborative effort that really connects with groups across the state about the power we have to influence the public investments that shape our community. And we are so excited to be back with the Junior League. We've partnered with the Junior League, I think, for at least the last 2 years, if not longer. So it's really exciting to be here tonight. This turnout is incredible, so thank you. And I guess I'll talk a little bit more about Count Me In and why I'm here, and then all about the 11 statewide ballot measures. Actually, I'm only going to talk about 9 of them. As a reminder, it's just ingrained in my head that I have to talk about all 11. But I have 2 great guests with me tonight who are actually going to take deeper dives into 2 of the measures. So a little bit more about Count Me In. We started Count Me In 2016 to educate and energize Coloradans about our state elections, because we knew that elections are a really important way that we make these collective choices in Colorado. Like I said, Count Me In really focuses on the power we have through the ballot. We know it's really easy to get caught up with who's at the top of the ticket, who's running, who's there. You get bombarded everywhere you look, in your mailbox, on all of your social media feeds, and now on your phone through text messages and also them calling. But we really wanted to make sure that we dug through that noise and talked about the importance of the decisions we make at the bottom of the ballot, those ballot measures, right? Where we make those important policy decisions that shape our state and our communities. Again, we have 11 statewide ballot measures this year, not including our local measures. I know if you're in Denver, we have a whole slew of them, and I'm sure other counties have the same. One thing to note about Count Me In is that we don't advocate one way or another on a ballot measure, but instead we want to be here to help break down what each ballot measure says so that we all understand what we're voting on. We know ballot language can be long and confusing, but sometimes it's written in legalese and it's in all caps a lot of all the time. So it feels like it's yelling at you, right? And it's written that way per our Constitution. So we are here as a resource. We want to help you understand what each ballot measure is saying and how it affects you and your community. So we're here not to tell you which way to vote, but rather help spark that conversation for you to have with your family, with your friends, so you can be that resource like I am for my friends in talking about what the ballot measures actually mean. And Erica, if we could go to the next slide. So before we jump into the 11 ballot measures, I just wanted to touch on voting in Colorado. Like I just said, Count Me In, we value the importance of voting and understanding what's on your ballot. We really truly believe that an informed voter is the best voter. But we also want to acknowledge that Colorado is really unique in what we vote on. We get to vote on a lot of different issues, and in Colorado, we are the final decision makers on how we fund our public investments. So it's really crucial that we understand what's on that ballot. It's important not only to know what we're voting on, but also how we vote, right? Colorado is an all options voting state, meaning that every registered voter is going to get a mail ballot. I know I received mine on Saturday, which is really exciting. I hope that most of you have received yours. So voters can either choose to vote that mail ballot, pop it in the mail and get it back to your county clerk. You have the option to drop it off at a Dropbox location or even a voter service and polling center. Or if you don't want to vote by mail, you can go in and vote in person. In Colorado, we also are, you can register to vote up to and on election day. And so that's really, it makes it pretty accessible and easy to actually get that ballot. Important dates that I want to call out, October 9th, which was on Friday, that was the first day when counties could start mailing ballots. October 19th, or by October 19th, some places have already started, voter service centers are open in your community where you can vote in person, you can drop off that mail ballot, you can register to vote, you can get a replacement ballot if you spilled coffee or wine on your ballot. So that's really important to know where your voter service and polling center is. October 26th is another key date. It's the last day that you can register and receive a mail ballot by mail from your county. So you can register, if you register by October 26th, your county can mail you your ballot. If you register after, you just have to register and go in and vote in person. And then of course, November 3rd, Election Day, those ballots need to be in at your county clerk's office by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Postmarks do not count. So if you are planning to mail your ballot, it's suggested that you actually get it in the mail by October 26th. If you're planning to vote in person and there happens to be a line at your voter service and polling center and you are there by 7 p.m., you can still vote. So stay in line, and hopefully this all helps and you can encourage all your voting friends to make sure that they understand these rules too. All right, next slide. So, like I mentioned, there are 11 statewide measures. There are 4 amendments that we have on this year's ballot and 7 propositions. Later in the evening, Amendment B and Proposition 118 will be discussed, so I won't go through that. But before we jump into this big list of measures, I wanted to explain and do a little Civics 101 again about what's the difference between amendments and propositions, and why are some of them letters and why are some of them numbers? So next slide. So first I want to talk about referred measures. Referred measures are put on the ballot by Colorado State Legislature. They are those letters that you see on the ballot. So Amendment A or Amendment B, Amendment C, and Proposition EE. Those were all referred by our state legislature. So now let's talk about the difference between amendments and propositions. So the legislature can refer measures that change or amend the Constitution, and those are the amendments that you see. In order to get on the ballot, they must receive 2/3 majority in both houses. And then propositions, those create new laws, or what we call statutes. And those just need a simple majority from both houses to get on the ballot. All right, so let's talk about citizens initiative measures. These are the propositions that you see on your ballot. So any registered voter in Colorado can actually propose a policy to put on the ballot, and you have to go through a signature gathering process here in Colorado. Right now, it's required that you gather 124,632 ballot signatures from registered voters in order to put something on the ballot, and these will show up as propositions, and as the numbers on your ballot, and they can either be amendments or propositions. Like I said, amendments change the Constitution, propositions create new laws. All right, so now that we did Civics 101, who's ready for 9 of the 11 ballot measures? All right, so Amendment C has to deal with the conduct of charitable gaming. So what Amendment C is asking voters, it's asking us if we want to change the time that an organization must have existed to obtain a charitable gaming license from 5 years to 3 years. And so a charitable gaming license allows organizations to participate and put on bingos or raffles for their organization and raise money. It also allows organizations hosting the bingo or raffle that manage the games for the organization in exchange to be paid for no more than minimum wage. Right now, it's required that whoever's running that game, the raffle or the bingo, is a volunteer and does not get paid for their time. And I forgot we're not stopping for questions, but I was going to just ask questions, but we will wait because there are a lot of folks on the call. All right, so what Amendment C is asking is a yes vote. Do we want to change that time requirement from that 5 years to 3 years for charitable organizations? and also allow that charitable organization to exchange no more than minimum wage for that person conducting the game, or a no vote would just keep it the same, a 5-year requirement, and a volunteer to run the game. All right, Amendment 76. So Amendment 76 has to deal with the citizenship qualification of electors. This initiative would change Section 1 of Article 7 of our Colorado Constitution, which currently talks about how the requirement for voters. The Colorado Constitution currently says every citizen of the United States who has attained the age of 18 years and resided in the state for such a time may be prescribed by law and been duly registered to vote as a voter, if required by law, shall be qualified to vote on all elections. And Amendment 76 would change it to say only a citizen instead of every citizen. So a little background, Colorado requires citizenship to vote. So it's just changing those 2 words. If passed, this amendment would make it so, would have some effects on what we currently allow. Right now, in 2019, we passed the Colorado Voters Act, which allowed 17-year-olds who would turn 18 by the next general election to vote in the primary election. And if we pass Amendment 76 as Colorado voters, it would not allow that anymore. Right now in Colorado, we don't have any other rule that non-18-year-old citizens could participate in elections. However, nationwide, there are some efforts in place to allow 16-year-olds to participate in school board elections. There's also some home rule cities that allow immigrants to participate, non-citizen immigrants to participate in school board elections. In Colorado, we do not allow that. So it wouldn't really affect us, but if we did allow that, it would affect us in that sense. All right. Let's now move on to Amendment 77. So Amendment 77 has to deal with the gaming limits or bet limits in Blackhawk, Central City, and Cripple Creek. Amendment 77, right now we have a maximum bet of $100 on casino games, and it would allow voters in Central City, Blackhawk, and Cripple Creek to approve a new maximum bet limit and approve any new casino games. Amendment 77 would also expand the use of the casino tax revenue, so that revenue that the casinos make, they pay a tax on. It would expand the use that the state uses the tax to allow community colleges to include student retention and completion programs. Fun fact, of the 23 states that legalize gambling, Colorado is one of 2 states that limits bets. The other place that limits bets or has a bet limit is South Dakota, in Deadwood, South Dakota, and their bet limit is $1,000. All right, I'm going to move on, I think, to Prop EE. So Proposition EE would increase the tax on individual cigarettes, tobacco, and nicotine products, including vaping devices, and allocate the revenue that it would produce to tobacco prevention and education programs in the first 3 years. It would go to rural school funding, K-12 education, and increased housing stability and eviction assistance programs and affordable housing programs. All right, so let's break this down because this is a big one. If we can go to the next slide. Currently in Colorado, we do not tax vaping products. We tax cigarettes currently at a rate of 84 cents per pack of 20 cigarettes. And so what Proposition EE is proposing is that we incrementally increase that tax on that pack of cigarettes from starting in 2021 through 2027 to eventually $2.64 per pack of cigarettes. Nicotine products are currently taxed at 40% of the manufacturer's list price, and over from 2001 through 2027, it would increase by 22%. Like I said, nicotine products like vaping is not currently taxed, but if we passed Proposition EE, it would increase those taxes to be the same as tobacco products. And so let's talk about the funding and what this increase in taxes would actually create, how much revenue it would create. So in the first fiscal year 2021, if we can, I think we can go to the next slide for this. We would, if passed, Prop EE would create $82.7 million, mainly because that's for half a year. But for the first full year it would be implemented, it would produce $167 million. And for the first 3 years of this new tax, it would go to fund a rural school program. So rural schools would get some money, depending on, it'd be divided by per pupil. K-12 education, the general fund would receive some of this revenue. Some of this revenue would go to tobacco education and prevention. And then it would also go to housing development and eviction legal assistance programs. After the first 3 years, the new revenue collected from these cigarette, tobacco, and nicotine taxes, it would go towards funding a preschool program that would have to provide at least 10 free hours of preschool for every child in their final year before kindergarten. It would also go to healthcare programs and also tobacco education and prevention programs. And so incrementally, it would increase over the years of what would go to that preschool program after the first 3 years. All right.
We did just have, I know we're holding most questions to the end, but there was one coming in on EE about where specifically the funds will go to for education. And I know you started to answer that, but I'm not sure if that's a location question or if there's any more details you can provide about how the funds are going to be distributed.
Yeah, well, for the rural school program, the funds that would be designated to rural schools, 55% of that money designated to rural schools, 55% of it would go to rural school districts who have students, the number of students between 1,000 students and 6,500 students. And then 45% of it would go to districts with fewer than 1,000 students. And so really focusing on, I think it's, focusing on the effects of what COVID has done to our state budget and the funding that we've had to cut. In terms of the other general K-12 funding that it would provide in the first 3 years, I believe it would just go to the general fund. And I don't have specifics right now in my notes of where it would go to, but I'm happy to look into that, especially during the last half when I'm not speaking, and make sure and double check specific. But I think it's general.
Perfect. And I know I'm catching you by surprise, but it's starting to feel like it might be more engaging to capture these questions as we go along. Is there a max on the number of dollars that can be collected, or are these just estimates based on current levels of spend on vaping products?
These are current estimates. There's not a max. We would approve the tax. So it's just looking at how many people use these products right now and what that would generate.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, and keep these questions coming. I think it's sometimes easier to ask them.
Right, well, it's kind of already top of mind.
It's all fresh in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
All right, Proposition 113, National Popular Vote. So this proposition would allow voters to decide, or if Colorado should sign on to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. This compact would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes across the 50 states, including DC. This would only go into effect, this compact would only go into effect if the states would total 270 electoral votes who have signed on to the compact, which is the number of electoral votes needed to win presidency. If Colorado stays on to this compact, there will be 196 of the 270 electoral votes needed. Colorado has 9 electoral votes, but something about Proposition 113, actually in 2019, the Colorado legislature passed a bill that would have signed Colorado onto the national, or that did sign Colorado onto the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, but a referendum petition was filed. So this is a petition from any voter can do this that says, hey, wait, I don't agree with that and I want to bring it to the vote of the people. And so they gathered enough, this effort gathered enough signatures to place this on the ballot and have Colorado voters decide if we want to be part of this National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So if Colorado's vote yes on Proposition 113, Colorado would stay signed on to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And if Colorado voters vote down or vote no on Proposition 113, we would no longer be signed on to this compact. All right. Okay, so let's go to Prop 114, restoration of gray wolves. So Prop 114 is asking voters if we want to carry out a plan to reintroduce and manage gray wolves in Colorado, in Colorado lands, really west of the Continental Divide. And this plan would have to be carried out by 2023. Part of this plan, the commission would be required to make sure that we fairly compensate owners for losses of livestock caused by gray wolves. So gray wolves have been used to manage elk and deer populations in other states, such as Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, so in the northern Rocky Mountain states. Gray wolves, at one point, they were all over Colorado, but in 1978, they were actually classified as endangered across the country, except in Minnesota. And gray wolves were slowly reintroduced in the northern Rocky Mountains, like I said, in 1995. And right now they are removed from the federal endangered species list in that region as of 2011. So Proposition 114 is asking Colorado voters if we want to reintroduce gray wolves in Colorado. All right, so let's go to 115. So Proposition 115 has to deal with prohibition on late-term abortions. So Prop 115 would prohibit abortions after 22 weeks unless the abortion is needed to immediately save the life of the mother. Performing a prohibited abortion would be classified as a Class 1 misdemeanor. It would be punishable by a fine ranging anywhere from $500 to $5,000 and loss of their medical license for at least 3 years. So if you were to get a late-term abortion, the mother would not be penalized, but the doctor would. All right. So let's go to Prop 116. So these Proposition 116 and 117 have to deal with how we collect revenue to provide services for Colorado. Prop 116 has to deal with our income tax. Right now, Colorado has a flat income tax of 4.63. What Proposition 116 is asking is if we would look, if Colorado voters want to lower that single rate income tax in Colorado from 4.63 to 4.55. The cut would include all income taxes, including the corporate income tax in Colorado, starting in tax year 2020. So it would start for this year that we're in when we file taxes in January, or starting in January. If we can go to the next slide, let's take a look at what it means for Colorado. This would reduce state revenue by $154 million in the first fiscal year. This reduction would provide the average taxpayer with a reduction or tax savings of $37 annually, or 71 cents a week. This chart below here kind of shows the savings for the across the board for what your tax savings would be if that income tax was reduced from the 4.63 to 4.55. All right, so let's go to Proposition 117. So this one is gets a little bit wonky too. So this Proposition 116 is asking if we, as Colorado voters, want to make it so there has to be voter approval for creating any new fee-based enterprises with expected revenue in excess of $1 million over the first 5 years. Whoa, okay. Let's take a step back and let's talk about enterprises and our current tax system. So under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which is currently in our Constitution and tells us how we can do tax policy, we require a voter approval for all new taxes that we create. Enterprises, however, they fall into a fee category where they are state-run businesses that collects fees to provide a service. The revenue collected by enterprises, or the fees that the enterprises collect, are exempt from the table requirement for voter approval, meaning that our legislators also have the ability to create and approve enterprises. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk more in detail of what is an enterprise. So an enterprise is a state-owned business that receives less than 10% of its annual revenue from state and government grants. It has the authority to issue revenue bonds, meaning that it can take out a loan and provide a service and then use the fees that it collects to pay it back. And one thing to note about enterprises is that the revenue from enterprises is not included in the revenue subject to the TABOR revenue limit. So as a reminder, part of TABOR, or the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, it limits how much money the state can collect and use. We set a limit from a calculation of inflation plus population, and any money that collected that exceeds that limit has to be refunded to taxpayers. So what enterprises, they are not, the revenue collected from enterprises does not get calculated into that cap. So it doesn't get put under that cap. Let's take a look at examples of enterprises. So if we can go to the next slide. So state colleges and universities, some of them are state enterprises. They are a state-run business that use a fee or tuition in colleges and universities cases to provide a service or education for students. The Division of Wildlife is another great example of an enterprise where it's a state-run, the state runs this Division of Wildlife, and they charge fees to get into the park, or hunting license or fishing license, and they use the revenue they collect from those fees to help maintain the park or wildlife population. There's a lot of enterprises in the healthcare, like the reinsurance program, which was passed this year, and it helps keep the cost low of healthcare premiums, and where they would otherwise be a little bit higher. What 117 is asking us is, if we pass 117, it means our legislators cannot create any enterprises without going to the vote of the people. So it would require a vote of the people to create and pass any new enterprises. All right, so we got through all 9 ballot measures, and I think we're really close on time, which is awesome.
Perfect. Awesome. Yay. We've had a bunch of questions coming in. So I think I'm going to try to go in order. I'm going to take us back to 76 to start. Or wait, nope, not that. 77. So this is the gaming limits amendment. And so the question is, will this simply remove the limits and there will be no longer any limit, or does it propose a new limit?
So it's saying that the folks who live in Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek, so the voters in those 3 cities would actually vote on a new limit. So it's saying if 7 passes, it's saying that they could keep this $100 limit, or they could raise it or lower it, but they get it.
So it's saying basically because those are the communities that house the gaming institutions, they are the most impacted, and so they would be determining what is best for them and their communities, whether that's prioritizing revenue or prioritizing, healthy communities that don't gamble or what have you, whatever they think is best. Okay.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. I think going in order, we're moving along to 113.
Cool.
Would the popular vote proposition nullify electoral college?
So it would, what 113 is proposing, the National Popular Vote Compact, it would take the electoral votes from all those states who signed on and put those electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote. So, for example, let's just say Colorado continued to sign on, and this compact was enacted because they had all 270 electoral votes that they needed to say, yes, this is working. So Colorado, instead of right now, we are a majority win state for our electoral votes. So it's the popular vote of Colorado of how we assign our electoral colleges or our electoral votes nationwide. But what this would say is that Colorado would then take our 9 electoral votes and put it towards the national popular vote winner. So the votes would then be voted for whoever won the national popular vote.
So it's possible. So it's possible that our electoral college votes would go towards a different candidate than the popular vote of Colorado.
Yes, it could be possible that way.
Okay. I think I'm scanning. I think that answers this other question on Prop 113. So let's move along to 114.
I saw one in the chat that was asking about what states have signed on already.
Oh, yes.
There's 15 states plus DC who have signed on, and I'm happy to list them if you'd like. Otherwise, I can just put them in the chat later. I don't know what.
Yeah, post them in the chat. There was another question that I saw somewhere asking if other states are considering this or have it on their ballots this November.
Yeah. Other states are considering it. I'm not sure who has it on their ballot this year, but I have this really great graphic, and actually maybe I can share it later or send it over to you.
Perfect. We can embed it into the deck when we send out the replay as well.
Yeah, I have a great graphic of states who have considered it, states who have passed it in, one of their legislative bodies and not the other, or states who have maybe introduced it but haven't had a hearing. So I'm happy to share that.
Awesome. Perfect. I'm not seeing anything else. Oh, I think I got that one already. Okay, perfect. I'm not seeing anything else on 113. Q&A fairies, let me know if I'm missing anything. Moving on to 114, I was surprised a lot of people had questions on this one. What constitutes fair compensation, and how would a rancher prove the loss of livestock due to a wolf?
You know, that is a really good question, and that would be determined by the commission that is formed who would put this plan in place. And so I am not sure if there are provisions set within Proposition 114 or if that's something that the commission would set themselves. I know it's like a very non-answer answer.
So following on to that, are ranchers are they nervous about this proposition? They're kind of the group that would be against this.
Yeah, so I would say that the opposition is saying that they are concerned about their livestock, and also, you know, gray wolves are predators, right? And so it's their livestock, and it's also, you know, looking at humans and where we are in Colorado. Mm-hmm. The proponents are saying that, you know, gray wolves help maintain a healthy ecosystem, and that, you know, they are predators. They were here once, so they should be here and help us maintain this healthy ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have the names of any of the organizations that are supporting this, or any of the general sort of? Is it just environmentalists or?
Yeah. So the support. Two of the registered issue committees who are supporting this is the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action and the Colorado Sierra Club. And then opposition is this group called Coloradans Defending Our Wildlife, and then Coloradans Protecting Wildlife. And actually, I'm going to plug the Count Me In website on our
awesome.
Ballot. So countmeincolorado.com, our ballot information lists all the registered proponents and opponents with a link to their websites. So I would suggest, and part of Count Me In is encouraging finding, you know, your own research and seeing what the proponents and opponents are saying.
That's awesome. So that's on all of our ballot measures, all 11.
Yes. Yeah, and actually I'm going to just like put this in the chat right now.
Awesome. Perfect. At least one question on, back on 114. I did a late breaking gray wolf question. Are there any other benefits to the ecosystem other than to help with the elk population to allow gray wolves back into Colorado?
That's a really good question. Everything I read keeps talking about the elk and deer population and that overpopulation. And then I think that also, you know, contributes to, you know, elk and deer, they eat things, right? And if there's an overpopulation, they would overeat whatever's grown. So I would look at those websites and really check that out. But everything I've seen is really to help manage this elk and deer population. And then just thinking about that chain going down of what deer and elk eat, and then what's maybe not for other.
The circle of life.
Exactly.
I saw The Lion King. I know all about it. Okay, excellent. Moving on to 115, I think just one question here, which is what is considered immediate? And I think in relation to saving the mother's life, and then if it's assumed that the death would occur during labor.
So I am looking at our Colorado Blue Book, which you all should have gotten in the mail. It looks like the definition of immediate is that if a pregnant woman's life is threatened by a physical disorder, physical illness, or physical injury, but not including psychological or emotional conditions. And then an abortion, or rather an expedient delivery of the living fetus, is immediately required to save the life of the pregnant woman.
Perfect. I think that was the only question. We got that one from a couple people. Perfect. Prop 116. What programs in the budget would be affected by the cut?
Good question. So currently the way that we use our income taxes and also sales taxes, state sales tax and income tax, they all get put into the general fund. And so the general fund provides, and it's up to our legislature to divide up that pot of money. And so that means that our, things that come out of the general fund is K-12 education. It's money towards colleges and higher education. It's money towards healthcare systems. It's money towards our courts and legal services that the state provides. So it's, and like money towards transportation. So it's everything that we think of as like public investments that we get from our state. And so that pot of money is what would be cut, what would not receive the same, like the amount of money that it would be receiving now. So it would take that $154 million cut.
Perfect.
And I saw that last comment in the chat was the tax savings for income group annual, and yes, it would be that would be the annual tax savings that you saw on the last slide.
Perfect. So, and I think you covered this. I was trying to go through all the questions. I might have missed it. The state income tax currently goes into the general fund, right? It's asking what it pays, and then that's determined by the state legislature.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. I thought I heard that one covered. Okay, perfect. I think that's everything on 116.
Okay, I'm going to just answer this question about 150.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
That just came up.
Yeah, perfect.
It's asking if 115 has any other carve-outs like instances of rape or incest, and no, it does not. So it would be only, the carve-out is only for the immediate life of the pregnant woman.
Good call out and on that point. Okay. On Prop 117, is this just new enterprises, not changes to existing ones?
Great question. Yes, it would be just for new enterprises. So enterprises that are already in existence, which there are 17 state-run enterprises, they would stay and they would be able to function as if they were approved by the legislature or by voters. So this would be for any new creation of an enterprise.
And then also on 117, does that mean that university couldn't create a new program without votes?
Say that again.
Does that mean that the university or a university couldn't create a new program without votes?
No, they would be able to because they have enterprise status already. So they would be able to adjust tuition as they do right now.
Perfect. Would we be voting on whether future enterprise revenue is exempt from TABOR if we vote yes on this prop?
So any voter approval, any voter approved revenue would be exempt from the TABOR revenue cap. So anything that voters approve is exempt from that revenue cap. So it would maintain its still enterprise status and not be an enterprise. But what it would do is the legislature would not have that ability to create enterprises, right? And so if they, it could affect how we fund other things. Like if we needed to fund a new enterprise, but voters didn't say yes to it, we would have to find that money maybe from the general fund, or legislators might propose it that way.
Perfect. I think we're looking pretty good on 117. I have a couple, gonna go back to 76 briefly for, can you explain the difference again between the difference of every and only?
Oh, for 76.
76.
So it's just two words, and I think this is a little bit of a nuanced question. Changing it to only a citizen instead of every citizen has some effects. I mean, it would still allow citizens to vote. So if you were a natural born citizen, or if you were, you know, an immigrant that has citizen status, like you could still vote. But it's just changing it from every citizen to only a citizen. And it does have, you know, some of the effects that I talked about, like affecting 17-year-olds from voting, and like, you know, if this were the case in Colorado, if 16-year-olds were able to vote in school board elections, I know that there's been some effort, but it's never passed or gotten on the ballot. It would affect that.
Perfect.
So it's hard, it's confusing.
The main impact is that change from the 17-year-old voter, though, who wouldn't be able to then vote in a primary.
Correct.
Right? It's the limit. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so 117. I'm just going to read this as it is. I have heard that there are a couple legal questions surrounding the language that it may affect changes to existing enterprises in the future.
I think that there are some legal questions. I think the legal questions fall to mainly universities and higher ed, because they go in and out of enterprise status, which is interesting. So I think there's questions there of what would happen. And then if that university loses the enterprise status, would we have to go back to the vote of people to regain that status? Yeah, I mean, that's what I can answer right now.
Right. Perfect. And I think I'm just trying to double check. Ooh, a couple more on 113. I'm trying to bulk these so that they are at the same time, but can we repeat the current rules of the Colorado Electoral College if we denied the proposition?
Sure. So Colorado, we have 9 electoral votes, and we are a winner takes all state, which actually most states with their electoral votes are. And so the 9 electoral votes goes to the winner of the popular vote in Colorado. So all 9 of our electoral votes have to go towards who the popular vote of Colorado went to. And so we vote that way. The 2 states that, you know, can split up their electoral votes are Maine and Nevada. And so they have electoral votes that do it the other way, but every other state does it just like Colorado.
Yes, which I think answers this other question about it would never, not under current day, not under if we pass this, it would not be split proportionally between 2 candidates, only those 2 states.
Correct.
Yep. Okay,
Correct.
perfect. Cool. Good. Do we have a breakdown by percentage each state would have with and without the Electoral College?
I do not have that breakdown.
Okay.
Like the percentage of where votes have gone in like our popular vote. Is that the question?
I don't know. I don't know if, Lindsay, do you have more clarification on what that one?
I just deleted it for you so you could see through. If the person who sent that would resend it, we can circle back to it. But there is another one at 113 that I just sent through.
I think I got that one already. Yep. I think we're good. Perfect. We have just a few more minutes before transferring over to our next section of this. So if you have any questions on these first 9, please send them in. Caitlin, this has been so great and informative for me too. So thank you for this presentation. So if people want to find out more about Count Me in Colorado, They have the website. They'll have these slides after. Anything else you want people to know before we let you drink some wine and relax?
I would just say that Count Me In is a resource for you. If you have more questions, please let me know, and you can email me. I can put my email in the chat and we can find those answers. Count Me In really, you know, we want to become a resource. We want to have our website be used by all and be accessible. We go out and do these presentations to organizations and groups and, like, you know, book clubs. We're doing a really fun ballots and brunch on Saturday. So if you're interested in learning more, bringing this to your friends, your neighbors, your organizations, your colleagues, send them our way. We can set up presentations. But really, I think this has been really good discussion and part of Count Me In. I see all of these really awesome chats is helping, like, facilitate this space to talk about each ballot measure and what it means and what you've been hearing, and kind of clarifying and getting answers that you want and finding that trusted resource. So really, we are here for you. And, you know, I think I love civic engagement. If you couldn't tell, voting, this is a passion of mine. So it's really exciting to be able to bring this to you all.
Caitlin, do you feel like most people, or do you have any stats on what percentage of people, you know, fill out their whole ballot versus just filling out maybe presidential candidate or anything like that?
When we first got started, we started looking at that. In 2016, well, we didn't have the results yet, but I think that there was at least a 17% drop off in 2012 from that top candidate to the bottom question. And so, you know, we just know.
Meaning only 17% went all the way through, or
no,
only
we lost 17%.
Okay. Okay.
And, like, you know, it's kind of hard too, because you can pick and choose which questions you want to answer. And
yeah.
So, you know, that drop off rate it varies, and there's a lot of variables there. I will say, you know, voting no or voting or not voting on a question sometimes is also just as harmful as, like, not voting. So I think being an informed voter is really important, especially in Colorado, because we make so much policy on the ballot.
We really do. Really do. Awesome. Well, thank you, Caitlin. And I think you're gonna stick around through the rest of the
Yeah, I'm gonna hear this.
Yeah, there we go. So have some wine, and then the group, you can still chat her if you want more information. We'll be sending out information about Count Me in the post event. Awesome.
Thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. So we've got, if you've been doing the math, we did 9 of the ballot measures. We've got 2 left. So part of the reason that we are calling out these 2 is the focus areas of the Junior League of Denver. We focus on early childhood education and literacy issues. I will say we are not taking a position on any ballot measures this year, but in terms of an area of interest for league members and what we typically like to focus on, we felt that these 2 were really interesting. And last year we brought you some information on a ballot measure related to Tabor. So this is a nice follow-on to that programming. So with that, I would like to introduce our next 2 guest speakers. First, we have Kristen Strom. She is the president and CEO of Common Sense Institute. She is also an active board member, philanthropist, former small business owner. It is not on the slide, but she is a mother of 4, including twins. So very busy, Kristen. So she will be presenting in conjunction with Chris Stifler. He joins us from Colorado Fiscal Institute, where he is a senior economist. He has been doing research and economic research in the public policy sphere since 2012. You can see on the slide some of the areas that he's focused on. His fun fact, prior to doing that work, he was a Latin teacher. So if you know any Latin, very cool. Perfect. So Just a little bit of timekeeping so everyone knows the plan here. On Amendment B is where we're going to go first. Kristen is going to go cover for about 5 minutes. We'll have Chris do a bit more of a deep dive. He'll get about 15 minutes on the clock, and then we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A specific to Amendment B. Then we'll flip that once we go to 118. So without further ado, Kristen, I'll let you introduce Common Sense and kick off Amendment B.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica. Thank you to Junior League for the warm reception and for having me. And who doesn't love an event with wine? So I received my nice bottle of wine today from Blanchard and really appreciate that. It's great. A little bit about Common Sense Institute. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, we are a nonpartisan research institute, and we look at bills as they move their way through the legislature or ballot initiatives, and we examine them from a fiscal standpoint. So we do dynamic econometric modeling, which is a big mouthful, but what it really means is that we just look at what their fiscal impacts might be to your life as a Coloradan, and then also to the Colorado state budget. And I've included our website on here. Before we dive into Amendment B, I know that there was still a lot of questions around 117, which we're not going to get to today, but I would throw out that we have a great ballot guide resource on our website. We don't take positions on any issues. Just like the Junior League, we are a source for information, and so I would encourage you to check that out. We define what a fee versus an enterprise is, the two in there, so check out that on 117 if you still have other questions, and I'll throw it.
Kristen, yep, we'll make sure that ballot, your ballot measure guide gets sent out with our post-event. Thank you.
Sure thing. Okay, so let's dive in first to Amendment B, and Chris and I had the pleasure of kind of comparing notes, and as you could see from his resume, he has quite the degree pedigree in economics, and he is a state budget expert, and so he's going to be diving into Amendment B a little bit further than I will, but I thought that I could start off by giving you just a general overview of what Amendment B is and what it entails. So the Gallagher Amendment was officially passed in 1982. And what the Gallagher Amendment does, it establishes how property taxes in Colorado are collected. And it's determined by a formula. The formula established is an effective 45%, 55% split for total property taxes from residential properties and then non-residential properties or commercial properties. And the impact of this has been, over the history, while residential property value has grown from 53% of the total to 80% of all property value in Colorado, it still is only paying 46% of the total in 2019. And residential assessments have fallen from, in 1982, the residential assessment rate that you might have paid on your home was actually 21%. It now is 7.15%. So what Amendment B would do was would repeal this current formula that's in statute that requiring the split between residential and non-residential property, and it would essentially freeze the rates that we currently have. So a few key items from our study and our research that we want to point out, if you want to go to the next slide. A few things that we looked at, just a forecast change in property values when you're looking ahead to 2021, 2022, and where the rates might go. If things stood as they were today, if nothing happened to Gallagher, it is expected that the residential assessment rate would decrease once again to 5.88%. And again, that's the rate that's assessed on your home. So right now it's 7.15, it would decrease to 5.88. What that means, though, is that there would be less revenue. So you can see a few impacts on different revenues that we modeled. On K-12 revenues, there would be a decrease of about $500 million in revenue. And the impact on county revenues, so things, revenue that goes to pay special districts like fire and water, would be about $200 million. If you want to go to the next one. Something that's kind of interesting, what we took a look at is, this is a lot of numbers on this chart. If you bear with me for a moment, I'll walk you through it. If you look at kind of the middle column, you'll see the 2019 school district actual property tax revenue collected at the county level. So that's for 2019 at the 7.15% assessment rate. You can see the actual state total of revenue collected, which was about $5 billion. It was an increase from 2018 in revenue collected, 15% change. Now, moving ahead, if Gallagher did not pass, the repeal did not pass, it would drop, or it's anticipated to drop to 5.88 assessment rate. And if we just applied that assessment rate retroactively to 2019, you could see that counties, all these counties listed on this slide and the following slide would actually have had major decreases in their revenue. And I'll just call out a few, but you could see Boulder, if the residential revenue rate would have changed, that would have been a percent change of about 1%. And if you want to go to the next slide, you can see here are the remaining counties. So in total, 16 counties across the state would have seen negative revenue growth under a change to a 5.88 residential assessment rate. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. It's important to remember that assessment rates are only one part of the property tax equation. So if the assessment rate drops, that amount drops, local taxing jurisdictions can actually increase their tax mill levies. And some local jurisdictions actually have automatic triggers that automatically increase their mill levies, which are taxes as well. Many communities do that, and I think I'm sure many that you live in, which ultimately has an impact of raising taxes, not just on residential property owners, but commercial property owners. And because commercial property owners face a much higher tax rate, most of them are taxed at 29% compared to residential, which is taxed at 7.15%. They end up paying a larger share of the total property taxes. And it's actually about 4 times what then residential pays. And so you can see in our work, what we did is we said, okay, how does our state compare just in commercial property tax collection across other major cities in the United States? And what you can see if you look at this chart is poor Walsenburg in Colorado actually has the highest percent in terms of a percent change compared to these other cities. But you can see the result is a trend of declining residential assessment rate, which is currently what we're on trajectory for. As I mentioned, in 1982, when this first passed, our residential tax rate was 21%. We're now at 7%. It's supposed to go down again. Increasing mill levies, commercial properties in some parts of the state are actually paying higher property taxes than other major urban areas across the United States. So real quickly, to kind of just sum up a few of our key findings, if you want to go to the next slide, hopefully this will kind of.
And Kristen, real fast before we move forward on this, I think, and I'm not sure if the table just got cut off, it looks like Denver was maybe
Denver's
left off.
not on there because, so this is only the 16 counties that would have had a decrease in revenue. And
Okay.
that's part of the Gallagher formula that's, some critics have said it doesn't work, is because it hurts a lot of other rural communities, especially that might not have a commercial property tax base. So what happens is they actually get a decrease in revenue. And you can see these different counties across the state that would have had a decrease.
Perfect. Sorry to mess up the flow. Let's hear the concluding remarks.
And I just saw a question pop in. How many counties are there total? There's 16 total that would have, if we would have had 2019 be at 5.88, which is what it's anticipated to go down, would have had decrease in revenue. So if it passes, so what will happen is the freezing of the residential rate would halt. It would be frozen. And the anticipated reduction that I mentioned to 5.88 would not happen. And so that would probably, by estimate, reduce property tax by nearly $700 million. Residential homeowners are likely to pay higher taxes in the future as property taxes will grow in line with home values. So again, Your rate right now as a resident is right around 7.15. It's expected to decrease. If Amendment B passes, it would not decrease. It would be frozen at 7%. If it fails, it would decrease. But as I showed, that there would probably be a loss in revenue at the local level. So that would result in some different government and fiscal responses, likely less revenue for K-12 school districts, and our K-12 budget as a whole would have to backfill that as well. So just a few key points, and I'll turn it over to Chris, who's much more of the budget Amendment B expert.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah.
Talk shortly. All right. Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Kristen. So I think Gallagher is much like learning statistics. You got to take the same class about 3 times before you actually. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Kristen said, and hopefully the second time through might sink in a little more. So the next slide. To actually understand kind of the impacts of the state budget and local government budgets, I like to first start with what our state budget looks like. This actually speaks to the question asked earlier about the income tax cut and the general fund. So here's our general fund. My short way of thinking about the general fund is basically every dollar you give Colorado in income tax or sales tax, 36 cents goes to our schools. Another 26 cents pays for mostly the healthcare side, which is Medicaid, disabled, low income, elderly population healthcare. And then you have another part of the budget, which is about 9 cents each. You're talking human services, colleges, and jails. Or another part of the budget, our courts get about a nickel. Our transportation gets about 2 cents. So that's instead of thinking ethereal, what state budget looks like, that's what I want you to think in your mind when you see state budgets and taxes. You're talking 36 cents for schools, 26 cents for Medicaid. Next slide. To understand why something like Gallagher impacts the state budget, you have to understand this conduit, how we fund schools. So the next slide shows you that we fund schools collectively, both from state sources. So that's your general fund, that's your state income taxes and sales taxes. But there's also local property taxes that fund your schools. Last year, the split looked like this statewide, where about 1/3 of the funding for schools came from your local property taxes, and the other 2/3 came from state sources. And as Kristen was kind of demonstrating, if local falls, well, then the state is on the hook to backfill a lot more of the price for schools. But if you have enough to backfill, that's cutting money from our jails, from our colleges, from our human services, from our road budgets. Okay, so understand that pie. The next slide shows you the Tabor Amendment, which also factors into this story when you're talking constitutional amendments. Gallagher came in 1982. Tabor came in 1992. Part of the Tabor story, which is the enterprise stuff, that's why this slide is in my deck a lot when talking about ballot measures, is that revenue collection enterprise stuff that Caitlin told us about. But also I want you to understand that Tabor requires voter approval for any revenue increases. So yeah, if Gallagher would be repealed, that 7.15% could never go up without a voter approval, without a Tabor vote, essentially. It would only prevent it from falling down. So keep Tabor's still in the Constitution, Tabor's still at play, okay? So hold that in the back of your mind. Next slide. Now Gallagher, next slide. Gallagher was trying to solve a fairness issue, just to give you some history. Before 1982, you paid property tax based on the value when you bought your home. So this is kind of messed up. You could be living next to a couple that bought their home in 1940 in the same neighborhood, same school district, and you were paying property tax based on when you bought your home in 1980. And so we tried to solve that with Gallagher. Now the remnant of Gallagher that's still interacting with us today is, as Kristen told us, the 45-55 split. Basically says you can only collect 45% of property taxes from residential. The other 55% have to come from non-residential. So Gallagher, we reassess our value every 2 years, but it's the 45-55 split of Gallagher that still has its workings today. Next slide. So a little more detail. Kristen threw around mills and reassessment rates. So first thing to understand about property tax, it's complicated. And second, you don't pay taxes on the entire value of your home, only your assessed value. So if you have a $350,000 home, that first gets multiplied by the assessed value, that current 7.15%. And then that assessed value of $25,000 gets multiplied by your mills. Now you pay mills, about half of your mills probably go to your school district. Again, it funds that local side of things for your schools. Another 30% probably goes to counties, county budgets. And then there's also probably some for some small towns and cities, but also there's the special districts mills. So you probably pay mills to your fire protection district that pays for your EMTs and your firefighters. You might live in a library district where a mill or two of those average on 80 goes to a library district. You could be in a cemetery district. There's some like mosquito districts out there. But there's a lot of special districts that are solely funded by those property taxes. So look at the formula. It's assessed value times the mills. If the assessment rate, this 7.15, falls, it means those mills then are worth less. And that's what Kristen was showing with all that revenue loss to schools and counties. And there's also a fair amount of revenue loss to EMTs and fire districts and libraries as that assessment rate on homes falls. So the next slide is my seesaw. Back in the early 80s when Gallagher passed, the assessment rate on homes was 21% and all else, non-residential, was 29%. And that allowed us to only collect 45% of property taxes from residential. If you click the next, I think there's an animation. Yeah, oh. Okay, obviously my animation got screwed up. Is it spinning for? Okay, so.
It's fun. Was it supposed to do something else?
I'm not supposed to do that. The animation was the house is supposed to grow, and as the house gets heavier, the seesaw gets unbalanced. And so that there we go. Whoa, no. Wow.
I don't know, it just spins.
The animation must have goofed up in the email.
I tried it. Lindsay and I both, sorry, this is so hilarious, but we tried it a couple times.
That's all right. Imagine the home growing too heavy. And in order that we only collect only 45% from property taxes from homes, that assessment rate had to continually to be lowered. It fell to 18, then 15, and then 12, and then 10.5, and then 9.5, and it fell to 7.2% back in 2017. Okay, but look at the difference, and this kind of speaks to the county detailed data that Kristen presented, is that the last time it dropped, it was 7.96% in 2003, and then it fell to 7.2. That was a 10% reduction in the rate. In Denver, where my home is, I still paid more to my fire and my school district because the value of my property went up like 30%. So my value went up 30%. The assessment rate fell 10%. I still paid 20, more to my fire district, my EMTs, my county, my school here in Denver. But go to like Alamosa, like we saw on the slide, or Pueblo, or the San Luis Valley, or up in Moffett, Eastern Plains. You got places like Kremlin that maybe only saw 2% growth in homes, but the state cut the rate by 10% back in 2017. And so a lot of those local governments, those school districts, those counties actually collected less revenue. It's a weird impact where, and the critique is, all this housing growth in Denver is forcing budget cuts to firefighters in Kremlin because it's automatically cutting the assessment rate statewide. Okay, next slide. So think about that difference now, dropping it down to 5.88%. That's another 18% reduction in the residential assessment rate. So you have all these big districts. The fire districts are the one I keep referencing because it's the fire chiefs that are trying to explain. There's a lot of fire districts out there that are mostly residential. If you're a district that has a casino or a power plant or oil and gas property, if you have a lot of non-residential, you don't care as much about the rate on homes because it's not impacting your revenue. If you're, say, a fire district that's only a subdivision and it's all homes, well, that's an 18% cut in the revenue that you would be collecting because of that drop in the assessment rate. Or if you look at it another way, and this is the one I showed that really pisses off businesses, and Kristen mentioned this as well, homes make up 80% of value in the state, but they only have to pay 45% of property taxes. Or flip it and say, hey, y'all business owners, y'all only make 20% of the value, market value of property, but you're forced to pay 55% of the overall property taxes in the state because of this Gallagher 45-55 split. The next slide really shows you the 4-to-1 ratio. So here I've taken a $350,000 home. It is only assessed at 7.15%. And so it only pays about $2,000 on average statewide. If you have a $350,000 commercial shop, you're first assessed at 29%. And that 29% rate is locked into the Constitution under the Gallagher Amendment. You're paying 4 to 1. Businesses would really like a fix to Gallagher because they pay in a bigger burden of the property taxes as rates on homes have dropped and dropped and dropped. The next slide shows our ranking. So I took census data and I looked at what the average home in Colorado costs compared to what the average home pays in real estate taxes. And so a $350,000 home pays on average in the state $1,700. For your own curiosity, Jersey has the most. So if you picked up that $350,000 home, moved it to Jersey, you'd pay $8,500. If you moved it to Texas, you'd pay about $6,200. But again, you wouldn't pay an income tax, so you have to balance that out, or you have to live in Texas. Next slide. So if we're super low property taxes, a lot of that has to do with the Gallagher Amendment. Some of it is the remnant of Tabor cutting some other mills. But if you really look at the difference, I said today we pay about 1/3 from local sources. In the early 80s, we used to pay more than half of our school budget from local sources. So the state didn't have to backfill as much. And back in the early 80s, we were above the national average in per pupil spending. Today, the assessment rate is 7.15% when it used to be, again, 21% back when Tabor passed. And then if we don't repeal Gallagher, that rate is set to drop to 5.88%, an 18% reduction. Next slide. And so here are the projections from the Department of Local Affairs. They said a lot of it had to do with the fact that, well, one thing we're not working from, everyone's working from home, so we're anticipating a giant drop in commercial value. The Department of Local Affairs is projecting, and a giant drop, since no one's traveling as much, a giant drop in the value of oil and gas property. And so in the last several years, the seesaw was unbalanced because we had giant growth in residential. And so Gallagher gave you a property tax break. Well, now we're in this weird situation where we're in a COVID recession, and instead of the house growing too heavy, it's the oil and gas and the commercial side getting too light and throwing off the 45-55 split. And so this one-time recession, if the Gallagher isn't repealed, is going to ratchet down a significant cut to home property tax. And it is a lot of money. For every $100,000 of home value, on average, if you have 80 mills, you're saving $100 if that drop occurs, which stands to reason why the next slide shows you why there's such a big revenue hit to school districts, to counties, and then what was not estimated by the Department of Local Affairs was the impact of probably several $100 million to those special districts, those fire departments, those library districts, cemetery districts, recreational districts. For instance, like the Fraser Valley has a recreational district that pays for their golf course and their kids and programs. Those are all dependent upon local property tax, and Gallagher automatically cutting the rate is really going to hurt the budgets of a lot of those local governments. I think next slide. Yep. And those are the estimates that they put out a month ago or two to tell legislators what they're looking at for Amendment B. Is once you drop that assessment rate, all those mills to pay to schools are cut about $490 million and another $200 million from counties. And then again, you also can't forget about those special districts that will also lose funding. I think that's my next slide is, oh yeah. And again, those special districts, I spent a lot of time in 2018. It was a huge fire season. This is some remnants of my work in 2018 when the rate fell 10%. And so a lot of those districts, like the counties that Kristen showed, that were going to pay less money when the rate falls, there were a lot of these tiny fire districts that were in super high wildfire risk zones that were losing 20-30% of their budget because the rate was falling, and they were mostly residential. So again, it speaks to the statewide residential assessment rate really goofing up small rural area local governments. Next slide. Next slide. And as Kristen said, if Amendment B passes, it keeps that rate on homes from falling to 5.88%. It also takes out that 29% rate that's locked into our Constitution on businesses. So it would give our legislators the ability to lower the rate we charge or assess businesses. And again, I mentioned Tabor because you wouldn't be able to raise the rate. Even if Amendment B passes, the rate on homes can't be raised without a vote of the people. It just would keep it from falling down to 5.88%. Next, I think I'll pause there and.
Okay, perfect. And I think that's actually a perfect segue into our first question, which is just break down for us one more time what voting yes means, what voting no means. Tell it to us like we're, like a fifth grader, just very simple, because like you said at the beginning, Tabor, Gallagher, all of it's so confusing. So what does a yes vote mean here?
Yes vote on B repeals the Gallagher Amendment. It'll keep your property taxes higher because the assessment rate won't fall. It will also give legislators more flexibility to cut non-residential property assessment rates in the future. A yes vote probably keeps about $1 billion of funding for local governments. A no vote gives probably you a $350, $400 tax cut.
Perfect. I see some questions coming in specifically about education. So can you quickly touch on the other ways, the other financial sources for K-12 funding besides property taxes? And also if you have any insights into how remote learning is changing funding needs.
Yeah, so again, a lot of the funding source, about 2/3 comes from state sources. There's also the state education fund, but that also gets income tax. So think about 2/3 the funding for schools comes from our sales, our state sales, and our income tax. The other third comes from your local property taxes. Now that pie looks completely different depending on if you're in Pueblo or you're in Aspen. Aspen's like 75% locally funded because they can raise a lot of money on $500,000 on $1 million ski condos. Pueblo is about the exact opposite. The school finance formula says Pueblo gets 75% state, only a quarter locally funded. And so it's your local property taxes that fund the total program. There's also those things called override, which you might see in your local elections. You always see like vote yes on 6E or 3B, or which are called override. Override elections are basically saying, the state, you suck at paying for schools and you've been cutting us since the last recession. I'm going to ask my voters locally to raise mills in addition to my mills I'm already paying, and all that money that's generated from those mills stays in Littleton or stays in Boulder or stays in Douglas County. And that has been really a shift in the school funding world since the last recession. We hit the last recession, we basically cut $1 billion from schools. The pivot was a lot of districts went to 4-day work weeks. People are shocked to learn that 110 of our 178 districts are on 4-day weeks.
Yeah.
The other pivot was, let's go to our local voters and ask to raise property taxes to keep our kindergarten or better fund our art class, pay for a gymnasium. And so a lot more money has been pumped into the override mills. Now what's messed up about Gallagher is those mills might be worth less depending on how you wrote your election and what voters told you could do if the assessment rate falls.
Perfect. I think we just have time for one more question. I'm going to swing this one over to Kristen. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact to businesses and both to what does this look like for very large and also mom and pop?
Yeah, I think everybody's probably seeing a lot of ads right now that say that this, disproportionately impacts business. And as Chris mentioned, the key point is that right now residential is taxed at 7.15, commercial properties are taxed at 29%. And if you're a small business owner, obviously that makes it a little bit more challenging. You're paying a higher tax rate. But what Chris's slide had really clearly, which I thought was really well done, is that the problem is right now with Gallagher, because of this 45-55 split, is that the bulk of property taxes are actually coming from residential. Residential property value makes up 80% of it, whereas commercial makes up much less. And so commercial properties are kind of being stuck, and it's about a 4 times tax increase over residential. And then it further complicates, issue. If you look at rural communities, which have been disproportionately impacted as well because of this, because they might not have a commercial base either. So that's also kind of an issue too.
Perfect. Awesome. We are at time on Amendment B. If we end up having extra time after 118, we will circle back. So moving on to 118, Chris, you're going to kick off here. 5 minutes for you.
Cool. Yeah, so Kristen knows a lot more about the current bill in some other states right now. I was going to give you some history. I've been working on this project, this policy since 2013 when I wrote the original assessment on what program we were designing in 2013. So 7 years ago, back when only New Jersey and California had state programs. I think there are, 8 or 9 states that have since passed paid leave programs. And so we basically designed a paid leave system where workers would pay premiums into a system and into a big insurance pool. And then when you had a kid or had to take care of a sick parent, you could have partial wage replacement because you didn't have to go to work because you were taking care of the kid or nursing or on paternity leave. So we learned we kind of pointed some holes out in California's and New Jersey's policies that we kind of helped mold bills that we put through the legislature in the last several years and kind of got to the model of what is in the 2020 issue in front of voters. One of the big ones was 50% wage replacement, like in New Jersey, where it's 55 or 50, whatever it was too low for low-wage workers. Low-wage workers could hardly get by on minimum wage, so they really couldn't get by on 50% of minimum wage. So we saw a lot of workers that should be eligible for paid leave in New Jersey not taking advantage of the program because they couldn't afford it. So we tried to design our program where we tier the payout to help alleviate that problem. It speaks to why the current bill in front of voters has 90% wage replacement for lower wage workers, and that tiers down. So most workers will get set between 90 and 70% wage replacement if they had to take care of a sick family member. We also saw that 5 weeks in New Jersey, I think California, there was disparate impacts because low wage workers weren't taking the full weeks, or they would take 5 weeks, but the experts on breastfeeding said you really should be doing it for 12 weeks, and we're cutting breastfeeding short. And we saw that upper wage workers were augmenting those 5 weeks with their own paid leave policies. So we thought that giving more weeks here in Colorado would help alleviate that disparity between low wage and high wage workers. Again, only 4 out of 5 workers don't have access. So only 1 out of 5 workers have access to current paid leave. Now, don't confuse that with FMLA, which is for big employers, and it just gives you job protection. This would give you wage replacement on top of the job protection. And so when you break that down on what percentage of low wage workers have paid leave and what percentage of upper workers have access to paid leave, only about 5% of workers in the lowest 10% of paid workers, so you're talking minimum wage workers, only about 5% of them have access to paid leave. When you're talking upper wage, like the top 10%, 30% of them have access to paid leave. So this is the statewide program would be a way to, again, alleviate the equity issue between low and upper wage workers. And there's also some racial equity components, as people of color, workers of color, were more likely to be in jobs that don't provide paid leave. So that's kind of a quick history on how we got to our really generous paid leave program, 12 weeks, tiered wage replacement, expanded definition of what family is. So again, it was a hole we were trying to fix. It was 7 years in the making from our standpoint. It takes advantage of pooling. We ran, my office at CFI is only 10 people. So we ran AFLAC to see what paid leave would cost us. And it was so expensive because there's only 10 of us. And we were several of them are at prime birthing ages. So it would be very, very expensive for 10 of us because the pool's not very big. If you pool everyone together at a statewide pool, the premiums can drop a lot compared to a small pool. So that's the benefit of a big state-run program. I think on average, the Blue Book says it's a fair cost for the average worker. $235 is the employee share for an average worker. But compare that to the $9,000 you might get if you took 12 weeks of wage replacement. So it is an expensive program, but if you think you're not going to use it, you're not going to have a baby, you're not going to take care of a family member in the next 20 years, you'd be better off under this program. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Kristen right there.
Thanks, Chris. That was a good high-level summary, so I can maybe dive into slides right away and skip some of the top-line stuff. As Chris mentioned, this Proposition 118 would cover up to 12 to 16 weeks in some cases of leave. One thing that's really important to note, which I'll get into a little bit, is that compared to other states with existing programs, this would be one of the most generous programs in the nation to exist. And what I mean by generous is that in terms of wage replacement, which Chris mentioned, it starts at 90% for low-income earners and scales down, and then also the length of leave as well. At the bottom of the slide, you can kind of see the different categories of what would condone a paid leave reason. It also is important to note that for those of you that might have paid leave programs, no longer would you go through your employer to establish paid leave. You would actually file that with the state government to take the leave. So it would take the employer-employee relationship out of it. You would now be dealing with the new program administrator. Next slide. As Chris kind of went over this, but how is this program funded? Who pays for this program? I think that's important to know as well. It's important for Colorado voters to understand the economic impacts of establishing this new program. In its first year, it's anticipated that it would be a $1.3 billion program. And this is how it's funded. It's split 50-50 between the employee and employer, meaning that both the employee pays into the program and the employer pay into the program. There was a question in the chat I saw on what size companies can opt out or opt in. Firms with 9 or fewer employees do not have to pay in. Local governments can also opt out. Self-employed individuals must elect to pay into the fund for at least 3 years prior to being eligible to take the paid leave. State government workers are automatically enrolled, but federal government workers are exempt. And just by looking at the state government numbers, which is a large employer in our state, who would be required to participate in the program, like I mentioned, it would be a single year cost between $39 million and $94 million for the state government. And again, what is kind of the cost, which we'll get into a little bit. So as Chris mentioned, it starts at a 0.9 premium, and that is assessed on your wages. And we'll get into how much, that is really broken down. So the 0.9% premium rate that's taken out of your wages is split again between employee and employer. So 0.45, 0.45. Also written into Proposition 118 is that starting in 2025, the program can only grow to 1.2% premium cap. So there is a maximum cap, which is something that's a little bit different than previous paid leave proposals that have moved their way through the legislature as well. As Chris mentioned, this is something that's been explored in Colorado for quite some time. There was a bill in 2019 that moved through the legislature that ultimately did not pass. And again, this last session, there was something introduced that it did not move forward. And so now it's coming to the voters for you all to examine and decide what you think of the program. So we'll go into some more of the nuances if you want to go to the next slide. It's interesting to note, where is Colorado compared to other states? I like this map because it kind of shows where paid leave laws as of September 2020 have been implemented in other states. So the first program was in California, which Chris mentioned. Blue states have pending paid family leave legislation. The red ones have no plan at this time. Green have introduced, but it has been rejected either by legislation or by voters. Light yellow passed paid family leave law, but the program isn't active yet. And then the darker yellow is active programs that we have some historical data. And again, it's important to know kind of what's been done in other states so that we can make sure that if something were to pass in Colorado, we would have the best possible program in terms of, you know, how it might impact you and Colorado directly. Next slide. Again, this is kind of just breaking it down a little bit further on states that have enacted paid family leave. You'll see California, New Jersey, Rhode Island. Those were three of the earliest adopters. Something that's a little bit different to know about their programs versus Colorado's is that their wage replacements start at 60 up to 85% in New Jersey, whereas Colorado's wage replacement starts at 90%. You'll remember I said that Colorado's is one of the most generous programs, and that's because of our wage replacement and where it starts. In addition, you can see the length of weeks that their programs allot. So California 6, Rhode Island 4. Recent states have enacted a lot longer leave, but again, Colorado's would be one of the most generous, from 12 up to, in some cases, 16 weeks of leave as well. You can see maximum payout and job protection as well across the states. This is key because when we talk about the program, something that Common Sense Institute really delve into and we built a model around is a question around solvency of the program. So if this program were to pass at the 0.9 cap premium rate, people are paying into the program. The wage replacement, so how many people take the program and get their wages replaced and for how long of weeks, you know, is really, there's a tipping point at some point where there might not be enough money in the fund to pay out the benefits. And so there has to be really careful calculation done to make sure that it's a solvent program. You want to go to the next slide? So you'll hear me talk a lot about utilization rate. And what that means is that's taking the claims rate, which is how many people, what percent of the population is actually going to take the benefit. You'll see here's some current data that we have in California. The claims rate was 4.7%. New Jersey was 2.5. Rhode Island was 7.1. And then taking the average length of leave in weeks. So you can see ranging from 9 up to 13. And this again is really important because we can do some math and build a model to make sure that this will be a solvent program. You know, what is the point where too many people take the benefit for too long of leave if there wouldn't be any money? You can go to the next slide. This is just a visual on the wage replacement, which Chris alluded to. So in Colorado, that's the red line, that's us. We started a 90% wage replacement, and you can see that's for low income earners. At California is the dark, kind of a blue-black line. And that's 2019. They actually updated their program and increased their benefit a little bit. The light blue line was their 2017. New Jersey's kind of the light blue line, and Rhode Island is the line at the bottom if you're on the right-hand side. So you can see, again, this just goes to the point that our program is one of the more generous in terms of wage replacement. It's important because if you're getting more of your wages replaced, I think you're more likely to take the benefit. So we could probably, in Colorado, I think, see a higher claims rate because it has more of people's benefit or more of their wages being replaced at a higher level. Next slide. So what we did is we built a model, and really the model was to do some estimates around kind of what this would be. It's, as I alluded to, this payroll premium that would be taken out, the 0.9%, that actually equates to about a 10 to 18% increase in the income tax for individuals, depending on wage. And that's, you know, that's real money. We're living in kind of a recession, so it's an important thing to note. Next slide.
Real fast on that, you mentioned the cap of the 1.2%. Can you clarify a little bit how that cap comes into play?
Yeah, I will. The next slide actually answers that.
Perfect.
So at the start of the program right now, Proposition 118 says that it will start at a 0.9 premium cap. After 2 years, so the program can go, the first year is 2023, the program by 2025, it can go up to 1.2 premium cap, so it actually can raise to collect more revenue if the program needs to. The legislature can increase that premium cap and the administrators. What we found in our modeling is that with the claims starting out with a claims rate of 6.2%, and if there were to be an average length of leave of 9.5 weeks, that in 2023 there wouldn't be sufficient collections to cover the program. So it's crucial to know that if our claims rate got a little bit above the 6.2% of people taking the benefit for over 9.5 weeks, there might not be enough money in the program, which ultimately would trigger some sort of legislative action. Either they would have to increase the premium cap immediately or do some sort of bond as well. So after the first 2 years, when the premium cap can then increase to 1.2, and again, remember this is being split by employees, they're paying into it, and employers, then the claims rate could increase to 7.5% for an average length of 10.2 weeks while maintaining solvency. Anything higher than that, and it would be concerning. For perspective, we just kind of looked at what other states have and where they are. Rhode Island has a claims rate of around 7% and an average weekly claims rate of 12 weeks. And their program doesn't start off near at the same wage replacement as ours. So a question for voters, for Coloradans, are we establishing a program that's kind of set up to run out of money from day one, which would ultimately trigger some sort of increase in premiums down the road. There's been a lot of questions around cost to business. So next slide. So if you look at what's the cost to Colorado businesses, because obviously their employers are paying into this as well. In 2019, the corporate income tax net collections on businesses was $655 million. We ran a few scenarios, but in one of our scenarios, the middle scenario, in 2025, so after the premium could go up to 1.2%, there would be over $1.34 billion collected from employers, which is an effective corporate income tax increase of 204%. I think that this approach and the one-size approach to different businesses and business sizes, there could be some severe unintended consequences as well for businesses across Colorado. 2 case studies that I want to point out on the next slide that we did. And I will mention that our model is available on our website. You can actually download it. You can run your own set how much it will cost you. You can put in what your wages are, how much it will cost you, and see it in years out. If you're a business owner, you can do the same thing and see what the cost would be, and then you can see the overall cost. But we just took 2 case studies. One was a restaurant. Restaurants are being extremely impacted right now. They're kind of top of mind for everybody. COVID has really, faced hardships for the restaurant industry. But if you just took a restaurant on average in Colorado with 30 employees that has a 3% margin, they would see their margin reduced by 13% and cost increase $212 per employee. And a lot of this has to do with that if an employee took the leave, and I should mention that the leave doesn't have to be taken consecutively. Individuals could take, it throughout the year as long as it was approved by the state, that a restaurant would have to replace that worker. Food can't just serve itself or cook itself. And so there are a lot of replacement costs and training costs that would go into this for business owners as well. And then we just took a larger company example, a biotech company, 200 employees. you know, their margin would decrease, and they would also have to pay an additional cost per employee to implement this as well. We have a small team as well. Chris alluded, you know, that he has a small team of 10. We have a really small team as 10. So of less than 10, and as an employer, I could opt out, but my employees would still have to pay into the program as well. So that's important to note too. And I would encourage you to download the model. It's there to be a tool and a resource so that you could do the calculations to see what the cost would be to you. If you want to go to the next slide. So just a few key points and questions to ask as you're kind of thinking through this proposition and how it might impact you directly. The benefits are much higher and more generous compared to existing states. So they would be the most generous in the nation, talking about the wage replacement and the length of leave that we're proposing. The premium cap definitely is something that's changed from previous versions. But as I noted, that there is a risk of it not being solvent and stable as a program. And so there is a concern on fiscal stability of our state, what would happen if it didn't end up being a solvent program. And I think that that's all that I have. We can kind of turn to questions.
Perfect. Thank you both. So informative. First question is, some companies already offer very generous programs for parental leave, say. What happens to those? Do those programs get forfeited? Do they stay in place? Is this additive?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you might have a great paid leave program existing already where you work. So the state has said that certain companies could opt out if their program met the same criteria outlined in Proposition 118. So that would have to be negotiated with the state if they could opt out, but it would have to have the same benefits.
Only the company would be opting out though, and employees would still be paying it.
No, everybody
involved opts out. Okay, cool. Another great question is, a lot of people in Colorado are remote workers. How does this impact companies that might be out of state with employees operating in the state of Colorado?
Chris, do you want to take that one?
Your expression, Chris.
I don't know that one.
If they're employed in Colorado, that's where your W-2 is coming from, then you would have to pay into the program. It wouldn't matter if it was, you know, say you worked for Google, but they're based in California, you would still have to pay in the program here.
Perfect. I see some questions about people who may never take the benefit. Say you never want to have kids, or no one in your family ever gets sick. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, you would still be required to pay into the program. Even if you were super healthy and didn't anticipate having kids, you would still be required to pay into the program.
Is there a difference between sick pay and family sick leave?
Yep, and I'm going to go to my notes, and Chris, you can chime in too if you want. What's interesting about this paid leave program is it actually is going to combine the two. And so there was actually some recent legislation that was passed this last year around sick leave too. And going to my notes because I don't want to. And that was Senate Bill 205, which required employers to cover 100% of their employees' wages for up to 48 hours of sick leave. And that bill took effect immediately, but it would apply to all employers starting in 2022. So what's interesting is that employees that take fewer than 40 hours of sick day and no additional time off, both the employer and employee will be paying into the paid leave fund and will not be able to draw from the benefits. This will add to the cost of employers, especially if they have to pay 100% of the employee's wages during the 2 weeks of sick leave, and then they must also pay for the wages of another worker to cover them while they're out. The two benefits actually don't have to be taken concurrently. Employees will technically be eligible for up to 14 weeks of paid leave, It could have an additional operational impacts as well, again, when you're having to replace workers. The combination of the sick leave mandate and the paid leave program really does represent a large expansion in paid leave related benefits for the state. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, on Senate Bill 205.
So I think this is somewhat connected. A question about, you commented that you have to take it over the year and not consecutively. And then, so the
Oh,
question.
no, you can take it all at once if you want.
Okay.
Or you could take every Friday off and go skiing if you want. No, I'm just kidding. But remember that it would have to be approved by the state too. It wouldn't be something that you file or get approved by your employer. You'd have to document it and get it approved by the state.
That was one of the things that molded this bill, was people who are like, say, chemotherapy treatment were every week, so they could do it in consecutively. They do it throughout the year. Yep.
So switching gears a little bit, small businesses that are under 9 employees, would they be subject to the same 3-year rule that self-employed people are subject to? And would they have to pay it for 3 years before their employees would be eligible to receive the benefits?
So they can opt out, which means I believe that they can, or they could opt in technically, I think. But employers do not have to pay. If you have under 9 employees, employers do not have to pay, and employees still do though.
Perfect. Is the corporate cost figured out on an annual basis or a monthly basis?
Annual.
Annual. Okay, would the leading program approach have any minimum requirements, i.e. a person moves from out of state and then takes leave? So how long would they have to establish residence for, I think is the question here.
I don't know that exact answer. I don't think.
Hours, right? 200
Yeah,
some hours.
Yeah, I don't think it's long. I don't remember.
Not too long, this version of the bill. 250 hours or something, a couple weeks. Again, this is when you pivot and say, make sure you read the blue book. It mentions that in the blue book.
Perfect. There is one last question that I see. Wait, no, okay, there's 2. So since the relationship would then be between the state and the employee rather than the company and the employee, would any benefits for a company, I think we actually already covered this. It was asking about the nullified. So I think we got that one already, actually. Excuse me. Would the government be creating a new agency to manage this process?
Yeah. Yes, and actually when you download our model, you'll see that there's a line that says administrative cost, and that's the cost to run the program. And the Blue Book has an estimate around that cost as well, and that's calculated into our solvency modeling too. It's just that there is a cost to run the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks pretty significant.
40 million, I think.
Yeah, 48.6 million in the state budget, 22 to 23 to administer the program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Colorado's unique because some of the states already had a temporary disability insurance fund. We don't. So it's a little harder for us administratively to build a new program than it was for, say, other states that could attach it to their temporary disability infrastructure.
So tacking onto that, would employees still be eligible for short-term disability in addition to this leave? Or this combines?
It combines the two.
Yeah. Companies that have 9 or less, their employees have to pay into it. Are they automatically eligible, or is there a waiting period?
I don't know if there is a waiting. They're not, yeah. They don't have to participate. The employer side doesn't have to participate. Employees do.
Can you cover, and I think this is going to be our last question because we're at time, some of the expanded definitions. So there's a question specific to adoptions, and I think you said there's expanded definition of what family means. Can you just talk a little bit about some of those expanded definitions?
Yeah, and let me get the definitions because I want to make sure. Chris, you can chime in if you want, if you have it, but I want to make sure I have everything. Sorry, bear with me for a minute. Okay, Colorado's definition of family members when qualifying for paid leave includes any other significant personal bond that is or is like a family relationship, regardless of biological or legal.
So adoptions covered. Yep.
I would think so.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. I think, we're at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. Chris and Kristen, if people want to find out more about you guys and your organizations, where can they find you? Kristen,
Yeah,
I'll let you go
sure.
first.
You can visit us at commonsenseinstituteco.org. And I know that Junior League and Erica have been really generous to say that they will do a follow-up with some of our information as well. But we have a lot of great research on several of the different propositions. And you can always reach me directly too at Kristen, Kristin, at csinstituteco.org too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kristen. And Chris, how about you? Where can people find you and more information?
Our website is coloradofiscal.org, where my email is my last name, Stifler, at coloradofiscal.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our guest speakers, Chris, Kristen, Caitlin, for your time, not only this evening, but all of the prep that goes into it. As I think a few of you alluded to, we've shared some wine from Blanchard. Please enjoy that. And there should be one of our famous Junior League of Denver cookbooks headed your way as well, just as a token of thank you for sharing all this information with us. We really appreciate it. Everyone who's been on with us for the whole time or for whatever amount of time you were able to this evening, thank you for that. There will be a survey coming your way along with follow-up resources. So the survey will be open for 1 week. Please do take time. It should be just a few minutes to share feedback with us on what you liked and what you'd like to see differently. Next time, thank you guys for spending the evening. Hope you feel more informed and ready to vote. And keep sending us questions. And if you didn't catch that contact info, just reach out and on the registration page to me, and we'll get you in contact. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.